office. Maria followed suit shortly after witnessing Miccolo's movements. "What are you going to do when we get there? Try to replace the boss or something?" Reyes had now discovered fresh intrigue while motioning out of the door with Miccolo. "No," Sainz instantly responded in a neutral tone. "I was just going to kill them," he said, closing the office door once Maria was fully through. "Alone?" It was now indeed Maria's turn to layer on the questions. "With you, of course," Ixthed said while retaining the neutrality in his voice. "I was thinking of using you as bait to lure them out, you know," he said as the irremovable weight of detachment remained depressing his words. "I can't tell if you are kidding or not, Miccolo." Lotus could not tell whether Miccolo was kidding or not. "Am I?" Miccolo said with his voice lowering in tonality while a smirk followed his cryptic inquest. With the destination set by the navigator Lotus, the two had then progressed out of the mansion and into the McLaren to begin their little journey together. And while passing many localities with speeds of greatly questionable legality, their conversation continued. Lotus, captivated by the most immediate image of the sunbathed and lively daytime LA, as was witnessed through the tinted window glass, had suddenly begun speaking whilst still glued to the outside. "Why do you want to gain control of the streets so much, Miccolo?" Lotus asked with the car in motion as the duo began to slow down in order to obey the capricious creation that was the stoplight. "Because it is what I was made to do, little one," Exig said, his eyes faithful to the road and his voice unwavering. "Why the streets, though, and not corporate?" Lotus inquired of Miccolo with quite the apropos question, having been sincerely interested in the man's answer. The driver laughed at the inquiry, yet his vision remained on the road. All these gangbangers and cartel members might not be intelligent, but at least they are genuine. Miccolo's answer surprised Lotus, which made quite apparent by the befuddlement that had vanquished her physiognomy. However, Miccolo was hardly done there, which is more than I can say for the cunning white-collar criminals that hide behind a veneer of so-called legislation and procedure. I prefer to work with criminals who have the balls to admit to what they really are, little one, rather than deal with two-faced corporate snakes. It's easier that way. It's simpler. A rare moment for Miccolo this was, as the Artifinoid was not typically one to express such pontifications. Lotus gained a level of understanding after Miccolo's explanation, albeit not fully. "You are an odd one, Mr. Miccolo Greylove," Lotus stated in a childlike and playful tone, having produced a tender smile shortly after. I smirked yet again at Maria's comment before returning fire. "You aren't exactly the poster child for normalcy either there, little flower," the man stated with no derision to be observed. Lotus laughed out loud in agreement. "I never claimed to be normal, Miccolo," she articulated reassuringly while looking at the Artifinoid. "Good." Quick response, this was out of Miccolo with perhaps even more dogma to follow. "Normal people are boring, and you certainly aren't." A compliment this was for Lotus, but his eyes remained for the pavement. The car required not the heater, as the grin produced by Lotus filled the cabin with quite the warmth. The young lady then progressed to caringly caress Miccolo's hair, and the right side of his face as the duo remained in passage. This passage would end shortly after, however, as the earlier provided address had in fact been reached. An exchange abruptly sprouted once the vehicle was no longer in motion, parked nearest an isolated residential area of the city, which was hardly one representative of opulence. Worn out and long forgotten the buildings were that inhabited the location, while the streets were overflowing with debris. However, one would not require to make many steps in order to spot human waste as well, which in turn provided the locale with an indelible aroma. "The head of this group is Garcia," Lotus stated while in the process of carefully scanning the building where the leader was to be found. The Colombian cartel smuggled me in initially, but these guys were the ones to handle me afterwards. Lotus spoke with a tone of major sorrow smuggled deep into her heart, much like the striking lady was once into the country. "Sinaloa, yeah?" Mikolo swiftly inquired in a composed voice while searching his pockets for a cigarette. "Yeah." Lotus answered her man, equaling the response time. "He can be found on the 4th floor of the building," she added, clutching onto the despondency. "All right, stay here. It won't take me long," Mikolo said, having found disenchantment inside his pocket and not the fag. Shortly after failing to locate the cancer stick, ex-VI egressed the car at once and proceeded into the 4-story building. Of course, this fortress where Garcia operated from was not left unguarded, as once Mikolo did reach the main entrance, he was greeted with hardly the most welcoming salutations. "Where the fuck you think you are going?" said one of the henchmen, barricading the door. Unfortunately for the immodest outlaw, those would be his final words. Mikolo, without vocalizing a single sound, kicked the man on the shin with force of pure debilitation, bringing the brusque guard onto one knee, and then progressed to smoothly break his neck. The second watchman would most certainly react, yet his fate would mirror his friend's soon enough. He swung at Mikolo with all his might, but the artiphenoid parried the attack, providing Extiand with quite the exposure to make his move. While having the man's arm secured in his hand, Mikolo assailed the guard's throat, crushing the laryngeal prominence, or Adam's apple, as some most surely know it by, bringing the aggressor down to his knees as he grasped his thyroid cartilage with both hands while rendered entirely defenseless. Another clean cervical fracture followed shortly after, leaving the two bodies side by side as they were moments prior, with, of course, the only difference being that the duo was no longer breathing. First floor was dominated by Mikolo, alongside any and all whom occupied the vicinity. The second floor was no different as the artiphenoid continued to ascend the building in hopes of finding the kingpin. Those who diligently search, a great treasure they do find, and Mikolo had found his once he bashed through the door on the top floor of the building. "What the fuck?" Garcia yelled as he began to reach for his Taurus 605 357 Cal Magnum revolver in an effort to fend off the unexpected menace. "Papers, please," Extiand articulated upon entering the spacious office space, mocking the head honcho while slowly nearing his desk. To Garcia's credit, he was not a man of inadequacy, as he was able to secure the weapon and utilize it with impressive speeds. The boss fired off 3 shots at the intruder, registering 2 in the torso and 1 to the cranium. Heavy blur of double vision had suddenly conquered Extiand's field of view as he was forced to take multiple steps back after receiving a 357 caliber blast directly to the dome, the product of a concussion undoubtedly. Nevertheless, just mere moments after, the artiphenoid continued his promenade towards the flabbergasted leader, who had now abandoned the weapon in its entirety after the sudden realization of its inefficacy and had now opted for an escape route. Garcia rushed to the window in hopes of leaping to his freedom, yet his mind was polluted by the disbelief of most recently witnessed as he stood still, intensely gawping at the ground 4 stories down, grasping the error of his attempt. Does he make the leap of faith, or does he relinquish himself to the embrace of the devil? This decision, however, was one made for him, as Extiand was now found standing within grabbing distance of the goon, smiling fiendishly at the prospect of imminent liquidation. In the office of Garcia were many things, yet one of the more interesting components of the construct was a sturdy metal handrail, which accompanied a set of stairs leading down into a storage space inside the office. It was in fact this guardrail that acted as the tool behind Garcia's demise on this sunny day within the decrepit downtown building of L.A. Once in his grasp, X then violently pushed Garcia towards the rail, having then progressed to position his back directly against it, and shortly after which, applying the force necessary to snap the spinal column of the leader at the area located nearest the hips. Garcia was known for many things, however, being a contortionist was hardly one of them, and as the man's lifeless body fell on the ground, the backsides of his feet were no more than 7 inches apart from his head. Truly fortunate Garcia was, as he too experienced the unmatched privilege of being yet another addition to the extensive list of victims of the White Devil. Briefly after the man's departure, X II took the time while scrupulously eradicating all and any evidence left as a result of the pair's meeting. And immediately following just those efforts of elimination, the Artifinoid left the premises of the locale. Once reunited with Lotus inside the glorious sports car, the duo resumed their travels around the captivating environments of the vast locality that was La La Land as they headed to the next location. Maria had provided palm tree after palm tree, beach after beach, and district after district. The McLaren left distant in its rear view as the 2 younglings occupying the mechanical beast neared the ultimate destination. Of course, the pair's transit would not subsist without an absorbing conversation introduced. "You kill?" Maria had attempted with a question, yet was swiftly interrupted by the sedulous Artifinoid as his eyes had once again fallen victim to the road's subjugation. "Killed all of them, yeah." Xtheans played the role of XXV, fully expecting the young woman's sentiment. "Don't you fear retaliation?" Maria remained as inquisitive as a young child first learning of the world's wonders. Does a human fear retaliation from cockroaches? A rather illustrative point the Artifinoid made with his comparison, whilst entirely dismissive of the potential dangers as Miccolo did not perceive. Most belonging to the human species as even remotely equal to himself and his siblings. Lotus understood what the sadist had implied, as she too had been expectant of this type of response. "Do you think I am a cockroach, Miccolo?" the lady inquired with no underlying negativity resonating from her words and her intrigue unrelenting. Miccolo did not find himself capable of producing a reply to the question posed. Typically, many will tell you that silence represents consent or agreement, however. This was not the case on this occasion, as the Artifinoid remained silent in an effort to mask certain emotional bonds that were beginning to become reinforced when regarding a certain Maria Reyes. The young beauty glanced over at Miccolo while he was consumed by quietude before shifting her vision back to the outside, smiling to herself shortly after. Lotus had become aware of the Artifinoid's response without him even requiring to vocalize it, her grin signifying the heavy content resulting just from that non-existent answer. The 2 young adults had arrived to yet another location with yet another small collective of cartel members that were led by yet another small-time honcho. Miccolo went through the regular motions of parking the car, telling Lotus to wait, and progressing inside the building. Much like the time prior, Miccolo was warmly greeted at the door by a sole guard on this occasion, however, mere moments after their initial introduction. The guard had been reassigned to oversee a patch of ground directly in front of the main entrance. As his bulging eyes carefully scanned the asphalt his head had suddenly occupied. With this obstacle out of the way, Miccolo made it inside the locale, with a group of members rushing the devil to acquire his autograph, if you will. The criminals would unfortunately become much too star-struck, which would result in a total state of motionlessness as the Artifinoid would continue to ascend the stairs, leaving a trail of corpses behind. Soon enough, Ekstesev found himself face to face with the local leader, who had some rather harsh words for his unanticipated guest. Mikolo, being the mirthful creation that he was, cracked some jokes at the boss before progressing to crack his skull. The deed was done, and the time was now to cover up any traces of evidence. This admittedly had taken a longer interval of time comparatively to the instance earlier in the essay me-day, and this had left the pretty little lady occupying the car to find activities in order to alleviate the overwhelming sensation of tedium. Once Mikolo did return to the white McLaren, he found Lotus blasting heavy music inside while singing along and even imitating instruments. Encapsulated by the domineering resonance, Maria did not hear or notice Ekstesev make his return. "Yea, you are back," the little one proclaimed as the tone of her elation became yet another addition to the blaring song escaping the sound system. "Yeah, that took a bit longer than I expected," Mikolo responded to his girl while commencing a search mission to liberate a cigarette from its container inside the Artifinoid's pockets. "I am sorry, Mikolo," Lotus said in a saddened tone shortly after turning down the volume of the speakers. "I don't know any more locations. They only took me to the two I showed you before," she added, beginning to appear dejected as well as sounding like it. "That's all right," Mikolo responded with swiftness and neutrality fencing his words. "You did well tonight, little flower." He had finally located the burning stick, and while starting to light it, he resumed speaking. "You deserve a reward even. So, tell me what you want to do now," he said with a sense of relief provided by the cigarette drowning him. "Anything? Really?" the tiny one exclaimed in excitement, nearly clapping her hands at the prospect. "Sure," Mikolo answered, dedicated to the smoke entirely. "Let's go dancing, then." The young lady had already been dancing with the great partner of exuberance while making her proposition to the Artifinoid. Ah, shit. Mikolo's partner for the act of gyration was not jubilation, however, as the man, while being quite the capable dancer in all honesty, did not enjoy the activity even remotely. "Fine, let's go fucking dancing," Mikolo conceded, having already made a promise to his darling. Lotus had become even more elated, yet a sense of concern was most certainly present as well. "Can you promise not to kill any of the people inside the dancing hall, please, baby?" she solemnly and genuinely inquired of her man. Mikolo hardly required much time to provide the woman with an answer. "I can promise I won't kill them if they don't piss me off," he stated, having nearly finished his cigarette while his eyes remained fixated on it. "But they probably will piss you off in some way," she articulated as a sensation of defeat began to creep up on the woman slowly. "Well, then they are going to die," the Artifinoid replied swiftly, with heavy conviction presiding over the response. Lotus's state of recent delight had evacuated with grand gloom superseding it as her facial expression displayed the transformation in full. Mikolo noticed this immediately and found himself acting in ways most incongruous with his character as a result. "All right," Mikolo stated with understanding and concession. "I won't kill your precious dancers or whatever, even if they do piss me off," he added, having suffered a defeat by the hands of the 5'2" tiny lady who had formed a radiant smile on her face upon hearing the most recent remark. "We're going to need to stop by the house first, though. I am going to need some serious drugs if we are going to do this," Ekstesev appended as he planted the white flag. The key was placed inside the ignition and was indeed turned. The duo had begun yet another journey together, with the effervescent cabaret serving as the ultimate destination. The lustrous, enlivening rays of the soles had been replaced by the seductive beams of twilight as pair rode down the street heading back to the mansion. Street lamp after street lamp and block after block, the automobile conquered with Mikollo at the helm and Lotus as his fare. The young and enchanting lady was entranced by the irradiance fabricated by multiple sources of illumination stemming from shops, street signs, and traffic lights as she had her head rested comfortably on top of her palm whilst the portion of the door nearest the base of the window provided the support needed. This deep spell would be broken at once, however, as the duo had made their arrival back to the palace. "This is the most optimal point of entry," XXV had explained to his two younger siblings, who both found themselves imprisoned by the walls of total engrossment as they listened to their brother's paramount information. Reaching just this entrance would be best left to IX, as this task would require a significant level of acrobatic ability. Anders spoke while pointing at the blueprint of the location discussed as it was projected onto the wall by the epidioscope. "VI will take on the role of a guard once we obtain the proper documentation and identification and will be responsible for feeding information via the receiver." Professor XXV had suddenly ceased his presentation, with silence consuming him whole while his two pupils glanced over one another in befuddlement. What was the bright artifinoid waiting for exactly? His younger brother, X the Second, of course, as he had sensed him enter the premises of the mansion upon Mikollo's and Lotus's arrival. Not long was required before the duo made their illustrious ingress. "Something the matter, brother?" XXV inquired of Sexthadens shortly after he had stepped foot inside the living room. "Yeah, there aren't enough drugs in the world," the artifinoid instantly responded while heading towards his desk with intent, in an effort to remedy the lack of the aforementioned substances. "I have left a new formula of methamphetamine we had discussed prior inside the first drawer in your desk, brother." XXV remained speaking in an inculcating tone despite the disruption of his presentation to his two youngest siblings. "I even added the sweet flavour, as was requested by yourself," he added, patiently waiting for his brother to sample the new product. "Well done." XXV XVIII's voice had suddenly been captured by a squad of unbending zeal. The artifinoid progressed to the first drawer without any hesitation, and once the container with the altered substance was located, Mikollo crushed the crystals and insufflated the product with force tantamount to a vacuum cleaner. Briefly after the ingestion, the refueled creation loudly exclaimed, "Woo! That shit tastes sweeter than Ix's asshole." The vibration produced by the volume of Extine's remark was audible to creatures in the forest outside the mansion. Lotus genuinely laughed at her deviant partner, while the woman, in reference, quickly articulated. "Rude," Ix stated, crossing her arms, sincerely affected by the comment. "Gross, brother," Vi chimed in while inhabiting the state of grand revulsion, trying his best to fight off the mental image of the act mentioned between his two siblings. Inappropriate. XXV's turn, it was to make his contribution immediately after his youngest brother and sister, while retaining the collected explanatory voice. Xia laughed out loud, his volume remaining an impenetrable fortress, shortly before gazing at Maria and excitedly saying, "Let's fucking go dancing, girl." Gone dancing the pair most certainly did, with the establishment of choice being a Latin club by the name of Pecados Mortales, as was suggested by Lotus. This locale was quite expansive, with 3 stories in total, as one level served as the role of a dance floor, while another having been designated to the function of a restaurant, and the final one being a full-on night bar. This location was vibrant indeed, and had devoured the surrounding streets with its enormous emanations of liveliness, as the resonance produced by the location was one easily heard from a rather considerable distance. With the vehicle parked, the Artiphenoid had consumed yet another dose of the sweet candy he had brought along with them, while Lotus patiently waited, gently smiling. Finally, the preparations were complete, and the couple went into the grandiose and exuberant venue. Once inside, the duo was embraced by the zestful sounds of Latin pop, and even a mixture of Latin jazz, as they persisted through the waves of dancing and joyful patrons in order to make it to the bar of the establishment. Multiple shots of tequila for the little Lotus and multiple dozen shots of whiskey for the Artiphenoid were the cornerstone of the effort, as the couple progressed onto the dance floor, subsumed entirely by the crowd, while blanketed by the elation and the energetic tones of the perforating melody. Jubilation on one end creates quite the contrast to the suffering on another. "Please, no more!" cried the henchman in desperation one last time, before expiring to the beating orchestrated by the drug lord's right-hand man, shortly after delivering deeply displeasing news back to the big boss. This was, in fact, the very same goon who had escaped his meeting with Exthanth back in Lotus's little flat. Albeit he escaped the devil, he could not quite accomplish the same when it came to the head honcho's wrath, as this piece of information was just another troublesome addition to the chaos engineered by the sadistic Artiphenoid. First he takes out some of my more important underlings, and now this, stated Pablo Ochoa, the drug lord himself, with his back away from the henchman and the recently deceased. Just what are we going to do with our new mysterious friend, I wonder? The boss was speaking rhetorically with a voice of heavy contemplation and seriousness. What do they call him again? On this occasion the lord most certainly required an answer. "The White Devil, boss," said the henchman, as two additional goons began the process of relocating the body, populating the floor in front of him. The drug lord stated shortly after, chuckling to himself. "It seems like we just might need some help with this little problem of ours." Despite the bad news, Ochoa spoke with great vigor, overflowing with confidence as he began to turn around to face the henchman once more. With his vision now locked on his right hand and a phlegmatic smile occupying his face, Pablo Ochoa, the drug lord, calmly added, "It is time to exorcise the devil." End of Volume 1.